The Soviet Union never built vehicles to impress anyone. It built them to survive. While the West chased comfort and style, Soviet engineers built four-wheel drive machines that could cross rivers, climb mountains, and outlast entire wars. Some carried generals, some carried paratroopers. One was disguised as an ordinary family sedan. These are the 10 most overbuilt Soviet 4x4s ever made, and the last one on this list is still considered unstoppable, decades after it first rolled off the line. Number 10. GAZ 61. Before the Soviet Union had a proper off-road Jeep, it had a general's sedan that could climb mountains most trucks couldn't touch. The GAZ 61 started life as an ordinary GAZ M one-passenger car, but engineer Vitaly Grachev gave it something no Soviet vehicle had ever had before: four-wheel drive bolted onto a proper sedan chassis. Development began in 1938 as tensions with Finland raised urgent questions about cross-country mobility, and by 1940 the vehicle had entered limited production at the Gorky automobile plant. It could climb slopes up to 38 degrees and ford water over 70 centimeters deep, numbers that would embarrass plenty of modern off-roaders even today. Under the hood sat a 3.5-liter inline-six producing 85 horsepower, adapted from a Dodge design and capable of speeds over 100 kilometers per hour, all while carrying a full military load. Red Army commanders used the GAZ 61 to move through terrain that would have stranded any ordinary staff car, and it quickly became clear this wasn't a passenger vehicle wearing off-road parts. It was something closer to a tank wearing a sedan's clothing. Production never really took off, with barely 250 units built across the entire wartime run, as wartime shortages forced the factory to prioritize combat vehicles over staff cars. What makes the GAZ 61 genuinely overbuilt isn't raw toughness alone, it's the audacity of the idea itself. Nobody in the world had reliably put four-wheel drive into a mainstream passenger car body before this, and the Soviets did it in 1938, using tractor-derived components and hand-built precision, at a time when most of the world still saw off-road capability and passenger comfort as mutually exclusive. Its influence didn't disappear with its tiny production numbers. The layout it pioneered became the direct ancestor of the GAZ 67, then the GAZ 69, and eventually every UAZ that followed, making this obscure wartime sedan the true starting point of everything else on this list. The engineering underneath deserves just as much credit as the concept itself. Longitudinal semi-elliptic leaf springs handled both axles, paired with hydraulic shock absorbers that were genuinely advanced for a Soviet vehicle of this era, and the whole thing rolled on cross-country tread tires, built to grip loose or muddy terrain. A later variant, the GAZ 61-73, arrived in 1941 as a more refined four-door saloon using the same drivetrain, retaining every ounce of the original's off-road capability. Red Army headquarters relied on these cars to get through conditions that stopped everything else. Would you trust a 1938 sedan turned four-wheel drive to outclimb a modern SUV? Drop your guess below. Number 9. Luaz 969. Picture a vehicle small enough to be dropped from a transport plane, tough enough to survive a farm, and simple enough that anyone with basic tools could fix it in a field. That was the assignment given to Soviet engineers after the Korean War exposed how badly the military needed something lighter than the heavy GAZ 69 for airborne troops and rural transport alike. The prototype, developed at the National Automobile Institute and known internally as NAMI 049, eventually evolved into a civilian design, and by 1966 a pilot batch was built under the ZIZ 969 name, before production shifted to the Lutsk automobile plant in 1971, where it became the Luaz 969. Underneath its toy-like proportions was a genuinely unconventional drivetrain, the first Soviet passenger vehicle built around front-wheel drive, with the rear axle engaging only when road conditions demanded it. It weighed next to nothing by comparison to a standard off-roader, which meant it could go places heavier vehicles couldn't, squeezing through mud, snow, and narrow farm tracks that would swallow a full-size truck whole. It borrowed its running gear from the GAZ 967 combat transporter that came before it, but stripped away the amphibious capability for a simpler, cheaper package collective farms could afford in bulk. It never had the glamour of a military parade vehicle, and it certainly never had the comfort of anything resembling a modern car. But that's exactly the point. The GAZ 969 wasn't built to look impressive. It was built to be nearly impossible to stop, and it earned that reputation the hard way, grinding through rural Soviet life, one muddy field at a time before being renamed and modernized into the 969M in 1979. In a country that prized toughness over polish, this little off-roader delivered exactly what was asked of it, and quietly laid the groundwork for the GAZ 1302 that would eventually replace it. Early planning documents for the vehicle were genuinely ambitious about its potential uses, floating ideas like milking cattle in remote pastures, firefighting support, and even conversion into a mobile air compressor for roadwork crews, though most stayed on paper. What actually shipped weighed only around 750 kilograms, thanks to extensive use of fiberglass panels over a metal structural base, and its original 22 horsepower engine could push it to a top speed of around 80 kilometers per hour. The passenger compartment sat unusually far forward over the front axle, a layout that gave good traction and made the GAZ 969 feel far more capable in mud and snow than its diminutive size suggested. The GAZ 969 looks tiny, but would it actually beat a modern compact SUV off-road? Tell us what you think. Number 8. GAZ 66. Nicknamed Shishiga. By the soldiers who drove it, the GAZ 66 earned a reputation few trucks ever match. It was designed from day one to be airdroppable, meaning it could be loaded into a transport aircraft, parachuted into a combat zone, and driven away moments after hitting the ground. That single requirement forced Soviet engineers to build something almost absurdly tough, a cab-over-engine truck with a V8 gasoline engine beneath the driver, delivering a power-to-weight ratio nearly a record among production vehicles of its era. It became the first Soviet truck to receive the state quality mark of the USSR in 1969. Almost 1 million units were built over its 35-year production run, an unthinkable number for a specialized military truck. It carried troops, towed artillery, and hauled supplies through terrain that would strand more sophisticated Western vehicles, with a central tire inflation system, letting drivers adjust pressure on the fly for sand, mud, or ice without leaving the cab, paired with limited slip differentials on both axles for serious cross-country grip. Its reputation for surviving abuse became so well known that the Russian version of Top Gear once buried one under rubble, set it on fire, and submerged it in water, and the truck reportedly still ran afterward. The GAZ 66 wasn't elegant, and it certainly wasn't comfortable. Riding in the back has been compared by veterans to being shaken inside a wooden crate. But comfort was never the assignment. This was a truck built to be dropped from the sky into a war zone and keep working, and for 35 years, across nearly 1 million units exported to Warsaw Pact nations and beyond, it did exactly that without complaint, eventually earning cameo appearances in everything from Chernobyl to Wonder Woman 1984, simply because it looked and felt unmistakably real. A dedicated airborne variant, the GAZ 66B, arrived in 1966 with a telescopic steering column, a folding roof, and a collapsible windshield frame, all designed to shrink the truck's profile enough to fit inside Soviet military transport aircraft, alongside paratroopers. The standard truck measured just over 5.5 meters long, and weighed close to 3.5 tons empty, numbers that made it compact enough for airborne deployment, while still hauling a full 2-ton payload across broken terrain. Production finally ended in 1999, replaced on the line by the GAZ 3308, but survivors remain a common sight across former Soviet states today, still hauling cargo through conditions that would leave most modern trucks stranded on the side of the road. Would you trust an airdropped Soviet truck over a modern military vehicle? Number 7. LuAZ 967. Before there was a civilian LuAZ, there was this: a small amphibious combat transporter built to solve a problem the Korean War had exposed. Soviet military planners needed something lighter and more agile than the heavy GAZ 69 to evacuate wounded soldiers and deliver ammunition to the front line. Ideally, something that could be parachuted in and float across a river without missing a beat. Developed at the National Automobile Institute, the first prototype, NAMI 049, was completed in 1958, and after several revisions, the production LuAZ 967 entered service in 1961, built to serve Soviet airborne forces on the harshest terrain imaginable. Its design was genuinely unusual for the era. It ran primarily on front-wheel drive, with the rear axle engaging only when terrain demanded it, an unconventional layout that kept the vehicle lightweight while still delivering serious off-road capability. Early versions used a compact motorcycle-derived engine, producing just 22 horsepower, later upgraded to 37 horsepower, letting it climb gradients as steep as 58 degrees. The driver sat centered in the cabin, with the steering column and windshield folding flat for airborne operations, and the watertight steel body was designed to cross rivers under its own power. What makes the LuAZ 967 stand out isn't raw power or size, it's the specificity of its engineering. Every design choice, the amphibious body, the central driving position, the lightweight frame, was built around one requirement: reach wounded soldiers and get them out, no matter the terrain. It stayed in production for 14 years before evolving into the civilian LuAZ 969, and remains one of the more obscure entries in Soviet military history, a vehicle overbuilt not for spectacle, but for a mission where failure meant a soldier didn't make it home. The watertight steel body sat on four-wheel independent suspension, first using torsion bars, and later switching to coil springs across different production variants, delivering roughly 280 millimeters of ground clearance that let it shrug off obstacles most light vehicles couldn't clear. Fully loaded, it could still carry a payload of around 400 kilograms, while towing a trailer behind it, all while weighing under 1.5 tons itself. A specialized six-wheel version, called the Geolog, was also built in small numbers for geological survey work in Siberia's most remote regions, proving the platform's versatility extended well beyond its original battlefield purpose into some of the harshest civilian terrain on the planet, an amphibious combat transporter built to save lives, not take them. Number 6. GAZ 69. If the Soviet Union had a Jeep equivalent, this was it. The GAZ 69 was designed as a direct replacement for the aging GAZ 67B, built to be simpler, cheaper to run, and easier to maintain, using the same reliable 2.1-liter four-cylinder engine and 3-speed transmission found in the GAZ M20 Pobeda sedan. Development began in 1946 under chief designer Grigory Vasserman, with early prototypes nicknamed Trujenik, meaning toiler, and after years of testing, serial production began on August 25th of 1953. It quickly became the default light off-roader for the Soviet military and countless state organizations. What set the GAZ 69 apart wasn't cutting-edge technology, it was relentless practicality. It carried 2 separate fuel tanks for extended range, one beneath the floor and another under the passenger seat, along with canvas doors and a removable top for easy field access. Every civilian variant still had to meet military specifications in case of wartime requisitioning, meaning even versions sold to collective farms were built to the same rugged standard as those issued to soldiers. Over 600,000 units were built across GAZ and UAZ factories, exported to at least 56 countries, with a licensed version built in Romania as the ARO into 1975. By the time production ended in 1972, the GAZ 69 had already cemented itself as the backbone of Soviet light off-road transport for nearly 2 decades, having replaced both the earlier GAZ 67 and leftover Lend-Lease Willys Jeeps in Soviet service. It wasn't flashy, and it was never meant to be. It was simple, brutally reliable, and built to a standard that assumed everything from the roads to the weather to the enemy would eventually try to destroy it, and it refused to let that happen. A philosophy its eventual replacement, the UAZ 469, would carry forward for decades to come. Beyond its role as a standard troop and cargo carrier, the GAZ 69 platform proved flexible enough to serve as the basis for the two P-26, a light tank destroyer armed with early Soviet anti-tank guided missiles, a role few would expect from what was fundamentally a rugged utility jeep. Licensed production also extended to North Korea, starting in the early 1960s, where it was manufactured under a different designation for domestic military use, further cementing the GAZ 69's status as one of the most widely distributed light off-roaders of the entire Cold War era. Interior configurations typically sat 2 up front with room for 6 more, on folding rear benches, making it a genuine troop transport rather than a simple staff car. The Soviet answer to the Jeep. Would it have stood a chance against the real thing? Number 5. Moskvich 410. At a glance, this looks like an ordinary 1950s Soviet sedan, and that's exactly what makes it strange. The Moskvich 410 was conceived as an economical vehicle for repair crews servicing agricultural machinery in remote areas, taking the standard Moskvich 402 sedan body and giving it a driven front axle, a reinforced chassis, and enough ground clearance to match a proper off-roader. It wore mud tires on 15-inch rims straight from the factory, which on a car that otherwise looked like it belonged outside a city apartment block, created one of the strangest silhouettes in Soviet automotive history. Underneath the familiar sedan bodywork sat genuinely serious hardware. A 2-stage transfer case, steering gear borrowed from the GAZ M20, and 22 centimeters of ground clearance that let it tackle terrain no ordinary sedan should survive. But the same qualities that made it clever also made it fragile. The raised center of gravity made it prone to rolling over under careless driving, and its load-bearing unibody structure wasn't built to absorb repeated off-road punishment the way a body-on-frame design could. Body pillars could deform under sustained stress, and structural spars were known to fail without warning under serious off-road loads. Fewer than 8,000 units were built before Soviet planners abandoned the concept in 1961, favoring purpose-built off-roaders like the GAZ 69. The Moskvich 410 wasn't a failure of ambition. It was a clever idea pushed slightly further than its sedan architecture could reasonably handle. It proved a passenger car could be turned into a genuine 4-wheel drive machine, and proved just as clearly why almost nobody else tried it again, making it one of the rarest survivors on this entire list. The idea wasn't as random as it might seem in hindsight. Soviet planners genuinely believed a lightweight, fuel-efficient 4-wheel drive sedan could serve rural technicians better than a heavier, thirstier off-roader, especially for crews who spent most of their time on decent roads. The engineering team borrowed the transfer case from existing military applications and mated it to an unmodified passenger car body, betting Soviet unibody construction was strong enough to handle a job it was never originally designed for. That bet didn't entirely pay off, but the attempt alone makes the Moskvich 410 a genuinely fascinating dead end in Soviet automotive history, the kind of vehicle that only gets built when engineers are told to solve an impossible problem with whatever parts happen to be on the shelf. A sedan with 4-wheel drive and mud tires. Genius idea or an accident waiting to happen. Number 4. GAZ Tigr. Every vehicle on this list so far came from the Soviet era. This one didn't, and that's exactly why it belongs here. The GAZ Tigr was developed as Russia's answer to the American Humvee, first shown publicly at the IDEX exhibition in 2001, with pilot production of just 96 vehicles beginning in 2004, mostly for internal ministry use. The Russian army officially adopted it at the end of 2006, and full manufacturing ramped up through 2007, inheriting every lesson Soviet engineers had learned about surviving brutal terrain over 70 years of field testing across the Eastern Bloc. Its numbers are aggressive by any standard. Approach and departure angles of 52 degrees let it climb obstacles that would strand most modern military vehicles, while a wading depth of 1.2 meters means river crossings barely slow it down. Independent torsion suspension on all four wheels, a locking center differential, and an automatic tire. Inflation system give it the all-terrain confidence Soviet designers spent decades chasing with cruder technology. Armored variants add heat-treated steel plating to resist small arms fire, and the vehicle has since been exported to over a dozen countries and deployed in conflicts including the 2014 annexation of Crimea and the ongoing war in Ukraine. Including the Tiger on a Soviet four-wheel drive list might seem like a stretch, until you realize it's the direct descendant of everything on this countdown. Every hard lesson from the GAZ 66's field repairs, every design choice from the UAZ 469's simplicity, feeds directly into this machine. It's proof that the overbuilt Soviet mentality never actually ended when the Union collapsed in 1991. It just kept evolving under a new flag, with the same obsession with surviving terrain that would destroy anything less committed to the job. Power comes from a choice of diesel engines depending on the market, including American-sourced Cummins units producing between 180 and 215 horsepower for export variants, while Russian domestic models typically run a GAZ or YAM-Z turbo diesel of similar output. The vehicle is rated to operate reliably across an extraordinary temperature range, from 14 degrees below zero to 50 degrees Celsius, covering everything from Arctic patrols to desert deployments without modification. Armored versions can carry up to 10 fully equipped soldiers and have seen service with police and military forces in over a dozen countries beyond Russia itself, including Algeria, Belarus, and Uruguay, proving the design's appeal extends well past its country of origin. Modern Russian military hardware, built on Soviet-era toughness. Does it still count as Soviet to you? Number 3. Lada Niva. Nobody expected a compact Soviet car to change the entire off-road industry, and yet the Lada Niva did exactly that. Development began back in 1971, when a team of VAZ designers set out to build what they described internally as a Renault 5, combined with a Land Rover chassis, an idea that sounded almost contradictory at the time. After several rounds of prototypes, the finished design was approved for production in 1976 and officially entered production on April 5th of 1977, becoming one of the first vehicles in the world to combine permanent four-wheel drive with unibody construction, years before Mercedes-Benz or any Western rival attempted the same combination. Despite a modest 1.6-litre engine producing around 72 to 76 horsepower, the Niva punched dramatically above its weight class off-road. Short overhangs, a light curb weight, and a genuinely effective full-time four-wheel drive system with a lockable center differential let it climb, ford, and claw through terrain that stumped far more powerful machines. Capable of crossing a 58-degree slope and fording 60 centimeters of water in Soviet trials. It became Lada's best-selling export almost overnight, capturing an astonishing 40% of Europe's four-wheel drive market within a year of its 1978 debut at the Paris Motor Salon, and went on to finish on the podium at the Paris-Dakar Rally multiple times in the early 1980s. Nearly 50 years later, the Niva is still in production, having outlived the Soviet Union itself, the Land Rover Defender's original run, and virtually every rival that tried to copy its formula. It didn't just survive, it defined what a compact off-roader could be decades before the term crossover existed, directly inspiring the Suzuki Vitara and earning a screen credit in the James Bond film The World Is Not Enough. Its off-road credentials weren't limited to European rally podiums either. A Lada Niva was used to transport goods and personnel during the Russian Antarctic expedition between 1990 and 2001, hauling supplies across some of the most punishing terrain and weather conditions on the planet without any specialized preparation. More than 2.5 million examples have been produced since 1977, with roughly 80% of early production sent to export markets, while domestic Soviet customers often waited months for their own orders. The Niva never prioritized crash safety by modern standards. Later independent testing scored it 0 out of 16 points in frontal and side impact evaluations. The Niva basically invented the compact SUV before the term existed. Did you know that? Number 2. UAZ 452 Bukhanka. Its nickname literally means loaf of bread, and one look at its boxy, rounded shape tells you exactly why. But underestimate the UAZ 452 at your own risk, because underneath that unglamorous exterior sits one of the most genuinely indestructible vehicles the Soviet Union ever produced. Built on the same rugged four-wheel drive chassis and running gear as the GAZ 69, the Bukhanka evolved from the earlier UAZ 450 to become the first forward control vehicle of its type, built anywhere in the Soviet Union, putting the driver directly over the front axle to maximize interior space without sacrificing off-road hardware underneath. It became the default choice for ambulances, earning the nickname Tabletka, meaning pill, along with rural mail delivery, mobile workshops, and countless other jobs demanding a vehicle capable of reaching places regular vans couldn't. Its simplicity is exactly what made it so dependable. Few electronics to fail, a chassis repairable with basic tools, and an engine capable of running on gasoline as low as 72 octane in a pinch. Even today, the same boxy silhouette remains in production under the UAZ 3741 designation, still delivering mail and ferrying passengers through conditions that would strand most modern vehicles across rural Russia. That reputation for toughness has been tested in the worst possible circumstances in recent years, with Bukhankas deployed to active front lines in Ukraine despite their age and thin steel panels offering little protection against modern threats. Reports from 2024 describe destroyed examples becoming a common sight, with crews resorting to improvised cage armor and even reactive armor plating to keep the aging design relevant on a modern battlefield. 6 decades after it first rolled off the line, the Bukhanka is still doing exactly what it was built to do, showing up, working hard, and refusing to quit. Over its production run, the underlying platform steadily gained power without abandoning its core simplicity, starting with a modest 75 horsepower engine capable of running on rough 72 octane fuel, later upgraded to 99 horsepower following the 1985 modernization, and eventually reaching 112 horsepower in the current UAZ 3741 version, though that model now expects higher quality 92 octane fuel. A closely related pickup variant, nicknamed Golovastik, or Tadpole for its cab shape, shares the same rugged chassis and running gear while swapping the enclosed van body for an open cargo bed. A 60-year-old design still doing daily work today. What's the toughest vehicle you've ever seen in real use? Number 1. UAZ 469. Everything on this list has been building toward this. The UAZ 469 wasn't just another Soviet off-roader. It became the definitive standard by which every other Soviet four-wheel drive vehicle was measured, and more than 50 years after it first entered production, it's still earning that reputation the hard way. Designed as a direct replacement for the aging GAZ 69, development stretched back to the 1950s through prototypes including the UAZ 460, before the first production-ready UAZ 469 rolled off the assembly line at Ulyanovsk on December 15th of 1972, combining a simple, field-repairable design with off-road capability soldiers and civilians came to trust completely. Its numbers tell part of the story. Ground clearance up to 300mm in military trim. approach and departure angles of 52 and 42 degrees, and a rugged 2.45-litre four-cylinder engine that could run on fuel as low as 72 octane if that's all a driver could find. But the real story is what happened after the spec sheet stopped mattering. In August of 1974, 3 completely standard UAZ 469Bs, without winches or anti-skid chains, became the first vehicles ever to conquer Mount Elbrus under its own power, climbing to over 4,200 meters above sea level in just 38 minutes. The UAZ 469 has been rebadged, renamed, and reworked more times than almost any vehicle on this list, becoming the UAZ 3151 in 1985, then the UAZ Hunter, returning under its original nameplate for a 50th anniversary edition in 2022. Between 1.65 and 2 million units of the vehicle and its variants have been produced and exported to over 80 countries. No matter what badge it wore, the core philosophy never changed. Build something simple enough to fix anywhere, tough enough to survive anything, and reliable enough that soldiers, farmers, and explorers alike could stake their lives on it without hesitation. Standard military versions could carry up to 7 personnel, including the driver, or roughly 600 kilograms of cargo, while towing a trailer weighing as much as 850 kilograms, figures that made it a genuinely capable troop transport, rather than a lightweight scout vehicle. Beyond its mountaineering feat, the UAZ Hunter variant set a different kind of record in 2010, fitted with 32 people simultaneously, including the driver, and still managing to drive the minimum required 10 meters, without a single passenger falling out. That's 10 of the most overbuilt 4x4s the Soviet Union ever built, from a sedan wearing mud tires to a truck that survived being set on fire, buried, and drowned. If you want to see more of these forgotten machines built to outlast everything around them, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which one you'd actually want to drive.